You scrape the last bit of dinner into a container, snap the lid shut, and tell yourself you're doing the smart thing, no food wasted, tomorrow's lunch half handled already. That instinct isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. Underneath that practical habit, there's a quiet chemistry running inside some of those containers that has very little to do with whether the food still smells and tastes fine the next day. National cancer statistics put the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer at around 12%. Part of why that number stays so low is that the pancreas rarely complains while damage is building. It doesn't send an obvious signal, and by the time something feels wrong enough to see a doctor, the disease has often already spread. So today I want to go through what's actually happening, mechanism by mechanism. In a handful of common leftovers, people reheat without a second thought. And more importantly, exactly how to fix each one so you're not giving up the food, just changing how you bring it back to life. Start with something that's probably sitting in your fridge right now. Leftover fried food. Fries, fried chicken, a spring roll, anything cooked in oil that's waiting for round two. Most home cooking oils, sunflower, corn, soybean, hold up fine the first time you use them. Heat them a second time, though, and they break down in a way that's chemically different from normal cooking. That breakdown produces a group of reactive compounds, including 4-hydroxynonenal and malondialdehyde, that researchers have studied for their role in oxidative stress, essentially cell damage that builds up faster than the body can repair it. You don't need to remember those names. What matters is what they do once they're in your system. I see this come up constantly in practice, and it's almost never carelessness. People are trying to save money and reduce waste, which is exactly the kind of thing we tell people to do. But reused frying oil, heated again and again, keeps producing more of these reactive byproducts with each round. And the pancreas, sitting close to the gut and wired into its inflammatory signaling, ends up absorbing a share of that stress, repeatedly, quietly. The fix isn't complicated. Don't reheat fried food in oil, not fresh oil, not the same oil, not a quick refry to crisp it up. Use a dry oven at around 180 degrees Celsius or an air fryer for 8 to 10 minutes. That brings the texture back without adding a single new compound to the food. And if you're frying something fresh, treat the oil as single use. Cook with it, then let it go, rather than saving it in a bottle under the sink for next time. Now here's the one that actually surprised me most when I started reading into this, because it's a food we're told constantly to eat more of. Leafy greens. Spinach, kale, chard, sautéed Sunday night, stored in the fridge, reheated for lunch on Monday. Fresh leafy greens contain naturally occurring nitrates, and on their own, that's not a problem at all. The trouble starts after cooking. Once the food sits, bacteria already present convert some of those nitrates into nitrites, a more reactive form. Apply heat a second time, and those nitrites react with amino acids in the food to form nitrosamines. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies several nitrosamine compounds as probable human carcinogens, largely because they're genotoxic. They can act directly on the DNA inside your cells rather than just irritating tissue from the outside. I keep coming back to how ordinary this habit looks from the outside. Nobody batch cooks spinach thinking they're doing anything risky. Quite the opposite. Anyway, the body's response to that kind of repeated low-level DNA stress is what actually matters here, more than the chemical names themselves. Most of the damage gets caught and repaired, not all of it. Over months and years, the pieces that don't get caught are what start the trouble. The fix here is genuinely easy. Eat your cooked greens cold. Cold sautéed spinach works fine in a grain bowl, a salad, a wrap. The nutrients are still there, and there's no second heat to trigger nitrosamine formation. If you want them warm, cook only what you're eating in that sitting rather than a week's batch. And if you do reheat a portion, reheat it once. Each additional cycle adds to the nitrosamine load. That's chemistry, not exaggeration. There's another one that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and it's in almost every kitchen in the country: rice. You cook a big pot because it's efficient, then reheat portions of it for days. Raw rice almost always carries Bacillus cereus, a bacterium that survives cooking in a different form. Cooking kills the active bacteria, but it doesn't kill the spores, hardened survival structures that sit dormant through boiling water and normal cooking temperatures. Once the rice cools to room temperature, which happens to be right in the range those spores prefer, they wake up and start multiplying, producing a toxin called cereulide along the way. That toxin is heat stable, which is the detail that actually matters. Microwaving the rice the next day kills the bacteria, but it does nothing to the toxin already produced. It survives reheating completely intact. I rarely see a case of this kind of food-related illness that didn't involve rice sitting out for several hours before it ever made it to the fridge. Almost never just bad luck. Cool cooked rice within 1 hour of cooking. Spread it out shallow in a wide container rather than piling it deep, since more surface area means faster cooling. Get it in the fridge and eat it within 24 hours. When you reheat it, heat it until it's steaming hot all the way through, eat what you're going to eat, and don't put the rest back in the fridge for a second round. That's it. Here's one that catches people off guard because the food looks completely fine from the outside. Chicken. You microwave 2 leftover thighs for a couple of minutes, touch the outside, it's hot. You eat. Sound familiar? A microwave doesn't heat food evenly the way an oven does. It excites water molecules, and different parts of the same piece of chicken have different water content and fat distribution. Some areas reach a temperature high enough to kill bacteria. Others, just a centimeter or two away, stay in a range where bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter, both common in raw poultry, can actually survive and keep multiplying. Those are usually called cold spots, and you genuinely can't feel them from the outside. I used to tell people that touching the surface was a reasonable enough check. I don't believe that anymore, at least not for chicken specifically. A salmonella infection isn't a quiet afternoon of mild discomfort. It's a full systemic event: fever, cramping, vomiting, your whole immune system mobilized. And the pancreas doesn't sit on the sidelines during that. It gets pulled into the inflammatory response every time. Full-blown food poisoning isn't even the only concern here. Smaller, repeated exposures that never knock you down completely still keep the gut in a state of low-grade inflammation, and that's the kind of exposure that adds up quietly over years. The fix: use the oven. 175 degrees Celsius, covered tightly with foil, for 15 to 20 minutes. The trapped moist heat reaches every part evenly, with no cold spots left behind. If you're using a microwave, cut the chicken into smaller, even pieces, use medium power instead of maximum, stop halfway through to rearrange it, and let it rest covered for 2 minutes before eating. Or just eat it cold in a salad instead. That sidesteps the cold spot problem entirely. No reheating required. There's one more I want to bring up, and it's a little different from the rest because it involves two separate risks showing up in the same food: potatoes. Baked potatoes wrapped tightly in foil and left out at room temperature create a low oxygen environment, and that's exactly the kind of environment Clostridium botulinum spores need to grow and produce toxin. The CDC has documented real poisoning cases tied to this very scenario: foil-wrapped potatoes left sitting on a counter for hours after baking, then eaten without ever going back into a hot oven. That's the bacterial side of it. There's a separate chemical risk layered on top, and it shows up when potatoes, especially fries or roasted potatoes, get recooked or reheated at high heat a second time. That second round of heat increases formation of acrylamide, a compound the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as a probable human carcinogen, based on animal data and more limited human studies. So you've got a bacterial toxin risk on one side and a chemical compound risk on the other, both showing up in the same bowl of leftover potatoes. The fix: never wrap a baked potato in foil and leave it sitting out. Refrigerate it within 2 hours, foil off so it can actually cool. And skip the habit of refrying or re-roasting potatoes at high heat to crisp them back up. Reheat gently in a covered dish in the oven at a lower temperature, around 150 degrees Celsius, just enough to warm it through without pushing that second round of high heat cooking. All of this matters for everyone, but it carries more weight after 60 for a few specific reasons. Stomach acid production naturally declines with age, and a lot of people are also taking antacids or proton pump inhibitors for reflux, which lowers that acid even further. Stomach acid is one of the body's first lines of defense against ingested bacteria and toxins, so when it's reduced, more of what's in a contaminated bite makes it through to the gut intact. Add in slower gut motility, which means anything harmful sits in the digestive tract longer, and a weaker overall immune response with age, and you've got slower acid, slower transit, and a slower immune comeback all happening at once. That's about as close to a real triple whammy as it gets, which is why the same exposure that might give a 30-year-old a rough afternoon can hit someone in their 70s much harder. I keep coming back to the same point throughout all of this. It's rarely one dramatic exposure that causes the damage. It's the accumulation, a pancreas that's repeatedly pulled into inflammatory responses, from reheated oil, from nitrosamines, from bacterial toxins, from cold spot bacteria, from acrylamide, doesn't get a clean break to recover between episodes. And because it doesn't send pain signals the way other organs do, that accumulation can run for years with zero warning. None of this means leftovers are something to fear, and most of what causes these risks isn't really about the specific food. It's about a handful of small habits that quietly multiply the danger no matter what's in the container. One mistake I run into a lot is people cooling a big batch of food in a deep covered container, which traps heat in the center and keeps everything in the danger zone for far longer than it looks like from the outside. Another is the freeze-thaw-reheat cycle, pulling something out of the freezer, thawing it on the counter, reheating it, eating half, and refreezing the rest, which gives bacteria multiple windows to multiply along the way. And a big one, trusting smell and appearance as a safety check. Spoilage bacteria that make food smell off are usually different from the bacteria and toxins that actually cause illness, so food can smell completely normal and still carry real risk. The oil reuse habit from earlier in this video falls into the same category. It feels harmless because nothing about the food seems different, and that's exactly the problem with all of these. They're invisible by design. There's also the 2-hour window that almost nobody thinks about. Food left out at room temperature C on the counter after dinner, in a slow cooker that got switched off and forgotten, in a covered dish on the stove to cool a bit first, sits in a temperature range bacteria multiply in fastest for up to 2 hours before most people even think to put it away. On a hot day, that window shrinks to 1 hour. It's not about being forgetful, it's about a habit nobody ever explained the actual time limit on. And one more I'll mention because it ties everything together. Mixed leftovers, the kind where you've combined rice, chicken, and a sauce into one container. Each ingredient carries its own version of these risks, and combining them doesn't cancel anything out. It just means one container can fail in more than one way at once. If you're storing a mixed dish, the same rules apply to the whole thing. Cool it fast, refrigerate it promptly, and reheat it fully and only once. Before you go, here's the short version. Reheat fried food in a dry oven or air fryer, not in oil. Eat cooked leafy greens cold when you can, and reheat them only once if you must. Cool rice fast, eat it within a day, and reheat it just once until it's steaming throughout. Bring chicken back in a covered oven dish so there are no cold spots, or eat it cold. And never leave a foil-wrapped baked potato sitting at room temperature. Refrigerate it quickly and reheat potatoes gently rather than re-crisping them at high heat. Everything in this video is for educational purposes only. Always consult your doctor or healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. If this was helpful, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with your question, and subscribe if you want more like this.